Okay. It's recording.
Okay, you should have received these from me in some notes. These are rules for adding integers. Now, what I've told classes before with these rules, you want to just think of it as this is your line in a play, and you need to memorize that. So when it's your turn to talk in a play, you know what to say. And when it's your turn to add or subtract integers, you know what to do. Okay? So anyway, the first rule that we need to memorize is when adding integers with the same sign, you just add them and keep the sign. And the examples that I've showed are 5 plus 8 is equal to 13. Integers with the same signs, add them and keep the sign. And then the other example is a -5 plus a -8 is equal to a -13. You're adding two integers with the same sign, so you add and keep the sign. Now, here's the other rule that you need to memorize for this. When adding integers with different signs, you subtract and you keep the sign of the higher number. The two examples that I have, a -5 plus 8 is equal to 3, because I would subtract 8 minus 5, that equals 3. The higher number is 8, it's positive, so my answer is positive. The second example, 5 plus a -8 is equal to a -3. I'm adding integers with different signs, a negative and a positive. So I subtract 8 minus 5 is 3. 8 is the higher number, its sign is negative. My answer would then be negative. So here are a couple more examples. -7 plus -11 is equal to, now I'm adding two integers with the same sign, so I add and keep the sign. 11 plus 7 is 18. I keep the sign. My answer is -18. -12 plus 4 equals, now I'm adding two integers that have different signs. So I subtract. 12 minus 4 is equal to 8. The higher number is 12. Its sign is negative, so my answer is going to be negative. I subtract and keep the sign of the higher number. One more example. -6 plus 15 equals. Now I'm adding two integers with different signs, so I subtract. 15 minus 6 is 9. The higher number is 15. Its sign is positive, so my answer is going to be positive. Okay? All right, then the next thing that you got from me is something that looked like this. And this is rules for subtracting of integers. When you're subtracting integers, you add the opposite and follow the addition rules. Now that might sound a little confusing at first, but after some examples, it should help out. So the first example that I give you is 5 minus 8. So I'm subtracting integers. The rules tell me to add the opposite. So I add, and the opposite of 8 would be a -8. And now I follow the addition rules. I'm adding two integers with different signs. So I subtract. 8 minus 5 is 3. Keep the sign of the higher number. Higher number is 8. Its sign is negative. -6 minus a -10 becomes -6 plus a +10 when I add the opposite. Therefore, I'm adding integers now with a positive and a negative, different signs. I subtract. 10 minus 6 is 4. 10 is the higher number. It's positive, so my answer is positive. Some more subtracting integers, and I've always told my classes when you're subtracting integers, write your problem out all the time. Then you can switch things right in front of you. So you have a -8 minus 15. So I'm subtracting integers. I add the opposite. Now I'm left with -8 plus -15. I'm adding two integers with the same signs. So I add them. 8 plus 15 is 23. And I keep the sign, -23. 6 minus 13. I'm subtracting integers. What do? I add the opposite. Now I'm adding two integers with different signs. The rules tell me that I subtract. 13 minus 6 is 7, and the higher number is 13. Its sign is negative, so my answer is negative. One more example. Negative 7 minus a negative 10. My subtraction rules tell me to add the opposite. So now I'm adding a negative 7 plus a positive 10. Following the addition rules, I subtract those two and I get 3. And 10 is the higher number, it's positive, so my answer is going to be positive. And then lastly, we're talking about multiplying and dividing integers. And here are the rules for those. When multiplying and dividing integers, if there are an even amount of negatives, your answer is going to be positive. So it doesn't matter the higher number in multiplying and dividing, it matters on how many negatives are involved. An even amount of negatives is going to give you a positive answer. Okay? Here's some examples. A negative 81 divided by a negative 9. There are two negatives involved. That's an even number. Therefore, my answer is going to be positive. Negative 6 times a negative 2. There are an even amount of negatives. So my answer again is going to be positive. And then this last example, negative 2 times negative 3 times negative 4 times negative 5. There are 4 negatives. 4 is an even number, so my answer is going to be positive when I do the multiplication. Okay? And then the second thing that goes with this, when multiplying and dividing integers, if there are an odd amount of negatives, your answer is going to be negative. Examples of that, negative 81 divided by 9. There is one negative. That is an odd number. Remember, odd numbers are 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Even numbers are 2, 4, 6, 8. So 1 negative, my answer is negative. Negative 2 times 6 equals a negative 12. Because I only have one negative, my answer is negative. And then my last example, a negative 2 times a negative 3 times a negative 4 times a positive 5. There are 3 negatives involved. 3 is an odd number, therefore your answer is going to be negative because there are an odd amount of negatives that are involved. Okay? All right, I'll show you a couple more examples with multiplying and dividing, and then you can start on your work. Negative 2 times negative 20. There are 2 negatives involved, an even amount of negatives. That means my answer is going to be positive, positive 40 in this case. If I have a negative 8 times 7, that is going to equal a negative 56 because there is one negative involved. One is an odd number. Now, if I add 8 times a negative 7, that is still going to equal a negative 56. It doesn't matter if the negative's with the high or low number, just the amount of negatives involved. Negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 equals. There are 3 negatives. 3 is an odd number. Anytime there are an odd amount of negatives, your answer is negative. If you have any questions on any of these, you can email me. Everybody knows my email address. So go ahead and get started on your integer assignments.